In a way, why did Jesus die has already been answered by John in his first chapter, when he says that the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. He did not just pop in. He made his dwelling with us. He became one of us. Some kind of death was always going to happen. But why that one? Roman crosses were designed as the most brutal comment the state could make on a person's pretensions. It stripped them of everything. It labelled them human trash. Given who Jesus was, how were the Romans able to get away with doing that without at very least sparking days of riots? You would expect any attempt to lay a finger on him to be met with fierce resistance. But in fact, apart from the two random criminals they crucified along with him, Jesus dies alone. And far from defending him, his death on a Roman cross is actually brought about by his own people. Jesus is killed by popular demand. So why this death for this man? As we've already seen, part of the problem is this. Jesus is, say, God coming to rule. Well, they already had rulers. Jesus is the real temple. Well, they had a temple, a lovely temple. For most aspects of who this man Jesus is, there is an alternative. There's a workaround already in place. And many people are well content with the workaround. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. It's also that Jesus in reality didn't fit with their expectations, and he couldn't be made to fit. You take what Philip says to Nathanael in John chapter 1 verse 44. We have found the one Moses wrote about in the law. That's great. It's the good news, the Messiah that everybody has been waiting for. At last, God's rule is going to happen. At this point, the last thing anybody expects is for the story to lead to a Roman cross, because they all confidently expect that God's Messiah will kick the Romans out. And when in John chapter 6, Jesus feeds the 5,000, that would have only gone to confirm their understanding. This man really is the one Moses wrote about. So how did the 5,000 respond? They immediately form plans to make Jesus king by force. And then we begin to glimpse why Jesus goes on to die the death that he eventually does die. See, most of us, when we find that others, particularly if those others form the vast majority and seem to be on our side, if we find that they've got expectations of us, great expectations of us, we try and at least see if we can accommodate them. We go with the flow. But when they try and make him king by force, Jesus will have none of it. He goes and climbs a mountain to stop it happening, gets rid of the disciples to stop it happening, walks on the water in a storm in the middle of the night to stop it happening. Why? He isn't being difficult or temperamental. Quite the contrary. Jesus is being entirely consistent. He is set upon a way of life where he is 100% faithful to the Father. Again, my food is to do the will of him who sent me, he says. And he knows that only in that way can he be 100% faithful to the people to whom he is sent. There is no earthly chance that Jesus will shape himself around people's expectations of him. If he had done so, we can only guess at what kind of death he would have died. Just possibly, I suppose, he could have succeeded in leading a popular rebellion and overthrowing Roman rule. He might have died of old age in a bed in some kind of Judean palace. Most likely, though, he would have died on the same kind of Roman cross as he did in fact die on, but with the difference that there would have been thousands of other crosses around him. By going along with their wishes, he would have led thousands to their deaths and saved precisely no one. Either way, there would have been no resurrection. His death would have been the end of the story. And it wasn't. At any rate, why did Jesus die the way he did? Because he lived the life he did. You might think that if someone chooses to live a life 100% faithful to God in the midst of God's own people, he'd be in the safest place on earth. In reality, he died by popular demand, their demand. That probably tells us a good deal about our human nature. Jesus saw it coming and carried on living out the Father's will for our sakes. And that, says John, tells us everything about God's love. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have eternal life. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him.